Welcome to the deep dive. You sent us your sources, and now we're extracting the core of what you need to know efficiently. Today, we're zeroing in on a really intriguing and, well, frankly, quite unusual situation. The legal case surrounding the Taiwan Civil Government, or TCG.
Exactly. The political analysis you shared with us really pulls back the layers on this. At the center of it is a fundamental question. Were the actions taken against the TCG a legitimate response to alleged fraudulent activities, or, was there a political dimension at play aimed at marginalizing a dissenting viewpoint?
Right.
Our goal in this deep dive is to get a clear picture of the accusations, the TCG's foundational beliefs, and the arguments being made on both sides.
Okay, so to really understand the context, let's start with who the Taiwan Civil Government actually is. According to your source, it was established on February 2nd, 2008 in Taipei. Founders were Dr. Roger C.S. Lin and Lin T. Now, their central ideology definitely sits outside the generally accepted political spectrum in Taiwan. They hold the view that Taiwan remains under U.S. military occupation in the aftermath of World War II, and that sovereignty actually still rests with Japan.
Yeah, and consequently, they consider the current Republic of China government to be basically an exile regime.
Which is quite a statement.
It is. What's fascinating here is the specific legal interpretation underpinning their position. Dr. Lin's theory hinges on a particular reading of the San Francisco Peace Treaty of 1951. They argue that this treaty did not legally transfer the sovereignty of Taiwan from Japan to China. That's the crux.
Okay.
This is the basis of their concept of Japanese territory under U.S. occupation, and from this, they believe the U.S. president has a responsibility to normalize Taiwan's international standing based on these unresolved legal precedents.
So it's important to grasp that the TCG's aim isn't the traditional push for Taiwanese independence that you often hear discussed.
Exactly. No, not really.
Right. Instead, as the document lays out, their objective is to position themselves as a provisional governing entity operating within the framework of occupation law. And to really project this image, they took some quite distinctive steps. They established what appeared to be government offices.
Yeah, state-like offices.
They even formed a group called the Black Bear Squad and issued what they termed symbolic identity cards.
Right, and this is where the narrative becomes a bit more complex.
Right.
Our source mentions reports that these TCG identity cards were purported to offer visa-free travel to the U.S.
Okay, I saw that.
However, the American Institute in Taiwan, which serves as the U.S.'s de facto embassy there, officially refuted these claims, flat out denied it.
So that caused some confusion.
Oh, definitely. That kind of misinformation, regardless of its origin, undoubtedly influenced public perception of the group.
Interestingly, the TCG also organized regular delegations to Japan. Starting in 2011, apparently, they've participated in events marking the emperor's birthday and visited the Yasukuni Shrine.
And the analysis we have suggests the purpose of these trips was twofold. One, reinforce their conviction regarding Japan's continuing legal sovereignty over Taiwan.
Right, their core belief.
And two, to strengthen the relationship between Japan and Taiwan, but from their particular, perspective.
Okay, so keeping this background in mind, let's look at what triggered the legal actions. Big shift here.
Yes. On May 10th, 2018, the Chaoyun District Prosecutor's Office carried out a significant raid.
Yeah.
At the TCG's headquarters and various branch offices.
And people were arrested.
Yes. In total, 6 individuals were apprehended. This included Dr. Roger C.S. Lin, Lin T. A farm owner connected to them, the farm's accountant, and a couple of TCG office volunteers and members. 6 people.
And the prosecutor's office put forward the allegation that the TCG had misrepresented their political advocacy, claiming it was authorized by the U.S. military government. They asserted this misrepresentation was used to solicit fees for those identity documents and license plates we mentioned earlier.
Exactly. That's the core of the prosecution's case, misrepresentation for financial gain. However, the TCG and their supporters strongly contest these fraud allegations vehemently.
Okay, what's their side?
The argument, as presented in the document you sent, is that all the funds they collected were specifically intended for international legal proceedings, notably Dr. Lin's case in the U.S., and for public relations efforts within the United States.
So lobbying and legal fees, basically.
Essentially, yes. They also emphasized that their financial dealings were transparent and subject to IRS oversight in the U.S.
Okay, let's get into the specifics of these fraud allegations, maybe looking at the criteria the prosecution supposedly used. The first point was deception causing error, with the prosecutors arguing, as you said, that the TCG falsely claimed U.S. authorization.
Precisely. But the analysis you provided highlights a crucial point. There doesn't appear to be concrete evidence presented, at least in this source, that the TCG explicitly stated they had official U.S. endorsement.
So a lack of direct proof.
That's what the analysis suggests. It prompts an important question for us. If there's no clear proof of this direct deception, what exactly was the foundation for this central accusation? Seems more about implication, perhaps.
Interesting. The second criterion was financial harm due to error. The prosecution identified over 300 contributors as victims.
Right.
The implication being that they suffered financial harm as a result of being misled.
Yet the counter-argument here is quite, well, thought-provoking. Reportedly, court testimonies indicated that these members understood and were in support of the TCG's political aims.
So they knew what they were funding.
That's the claim. If individuals contributed funds knowing the organization's purpose, its specific political goals, can they truly be considered victims of fraud simply because the TCG's political beliefs are unconventional or haven't panned out?
That's a tricky legal and ethical line there.
Very much so.
And the final criterion was intent for unlawful gain. The prosecutors suggested that the TCG leaders were personally profiting, pointing to seized assets as evidence.
Right, the classic motive. But again, the analysis we're working with presents a different picture. Court records apparently showed a transparent and dedicated allocation of funds towards the TCG's organizational objectives, particularly that international litigation and U.S. public relations work we mentioned.
So the money went where they said it would go, according to these records.
That's the counter-argument, yes, which directly challenges the idea of personal enrichment.
This naturally leads us to the arguments that this entire case might actually constitute political persecution and that there were potentially instances of judicial misconduct. A key criticism raised is the very act of equating financial contributions to a political cause with commercial fraud.
Yeah, that's a big one.
These are fundamentally different activities, right? People donate to support political ideologies they align with, which isn't the same as making an investment expecting a financial return.
Exactly. It muddies the waters considerably. There are also claims that the definition of victim was broadened arbitrarily to include pretty much anyone who had contributed, irrespective of their level of understanding or their intentions in supporting the TCG.
Just donating made you a victim?
That seems to be the criticism leveled. Furthermore, the source expresses concern over the application of organized crime statutes in this situation.
Organized crime? Really?
Yes. The question is, if the primary activity is political advocacy, however unorthodox the beliefs, does it genuinely fall under the definition of organized crime? It feels like a stretch to some observers.
The timing of these legal actions is also flagged as noteworthy in the source.
It is, coming when cross-strait relations were strained and the U.S.-China dynamic was particularly sensitive.
Right, a tense period.
It raises questions about potential political motivations. Was this aimed at suppressing a dissenting, perhaps inconvenient voice within Taiwan?
The concern here, the analysis suggests, is that this could have a chilling effect on democratic participation and the freedom of expression more broadly.
Absolutely. If groups with non-mainstream views fear criminal prosecution for their advocacy or fundraising, it could discourage political diversity.
Yeah.
And if we consider the broader context, the TCG's non-mainstream political ideology is central. You really can't understand this without grasping that.
Yeah.
Their belief system exists far outside the widely accepted political viewpoints in Taiwan.
So the Republic of China's judicial system, operating within established constitutional frameworks, is inherently structured to uphold those mainstream interpretations of sovereignty.
Right. It's based on the ROC Constitution.
And may struggle or even be unwilling to accommodate fundamentally different perspectives like the TCG's.
So in a sense, the source suggests that the legal system itself, by its very design, might be resistant to these kinds of alternative views. This could potentially lead to their suppression through legal charges rather than through open political debate or engagement.
And the general unwillingness of the political establishment to even engage with the TCG further isolates the group.
Pushes them to the margins.
And indicates perhaps a limited societal tolerance for minority political positions, especially ones this far out.
It definitely reflects that tension.
So, okay, it's important to try and understand what might draw individuals to the TCG's ideology in the first place. Why support them?
Good question. Your source provides some insight into the motivations of their supporters. For many, it seems to stem from a dissatisfaction with the conventional historical narratives and the current political status quo in Taiwan.
They feel something's not right with the standard story.
Exactly. They are actively seeking what they believe to be a more accurate understanding of history and a different resolution to Taiwan's complex issue of sovereignty.
They also tend to view mainstream education and media with a degree of skepticism, according to the source.
Yes, a distrust there. This creates an opening for the TCG's own materials and courses, which obviously reinforce their belief in the Japanese territory under U.S. occupation status.
So they provide an alternative narrative that resonates.
Precisely. For some, especially given the perceived uncertainty surrounding Taiwan's international standing and, its isolation, the TCG represents a potentially viable alternative path forward.
And we shouldn't overlook the symbolic significance, right?
Definitely not. The identity documents issued by the TCG, even without official recognition from anyone, can provide a tangible sense of political and community identity for these individuals.
Fulfilling a need for belonging, maybe?
Yes, fulfilling a deep-seated need for belonging and validation of their beliefs. There's also often an underlying conviction in the necessity of U.S. support for achieving genuine autonomy for Taiwan, which aligns perfectly with the TCG's core tenets about the U.S. role.
Okay. So, as we consider the concluding thoughts from your source, it's clear that this case really blurs the lines between what constitutes legitimate political advocacy and what might be considered criminal activity. It's a gray area.
A very gray area. Supporters genuinely perceive themselves as being subjected to judicial persecution simply for their political beliefs and actions. They see it as suppression.
And regardless of the final legal outcomes, whether convictions stand or are overturned, the analysis underscores the critical importance of judicial restraint, transparency, and a fundamental respect for political diversity within Taiwan.
Absolutely. It highlights the need for clear frameworks, clearer lines perhaps, to distinguish between protected political expression and actual criminal wrongdoing.
So the legal system isn't used or perceived as being used to suppress minority ideologies.
Exactly. Ultimately, the source argues that safeguarding this political diversity and freedom is crucial for Taiwan's ongoing democratic development. You need space for dissent, even uncomfortable dissent.
So, to quickly summarize, we've looked at two very different interpretations of the Taiwan Civil Government case. On one hand, the prosecution presented it as a case of straightforward investment fraud, people being tricked out of money.
Deception for gain.
Conversely, the TCG and their supporters strongly maintain that it was a politically motivated act of persecution targeting their unconventional beliefs about Taiwan's sovereignty.
Right, suppression of a political alternative.
Understanding cases like this is essential because they compel us, and you listening, to grapple with the inherent complexities at the intersection of political discourse and legal systems in a democratic society.
It really forces us to consider where the boundary truly lies between protected expression and illegal activity. It's not always obvious.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into a truly complex and thought-provoking issue.
And maybe leave you with this thought. In any democratic system, how can we best ensure a balance between legitimate national security concerns, which are real, and the fundamental right to hold and express minority political viewpoints, even ones most people disagree with?
Yeah.
What specific mechanisms can be put in place to maintain this delicate balance and prevent the unfair silencing of dissenting voices?
It's a challenging question for sure, and definitely something worth considering further on your own. Thank you for tuning in to The Deep Dive.
We appreciate you listening. We'll be back with another deep dive soon.